Thank you for the opportunity to hold this session today. I mean, this is a real pleasure, and I'm delighted to share with you today a sutta that I've used a number of times in the teaching courses that I do. And just to say that the format here is I'm going to read through the sutta, and if you have any questions or comments, you're very welcome to interject and take those in. Or the other thing you could do is just write them into the chat, and we'll pick them up at the end of the sutta. The sutta is quite short, but as with a lot of these suttas, there's a lot in there, and so there's a lot to actually explore around the nature of practice and the purpose of practice. So feel free to ask any questions, and really don't be worried about the nature of the question. There's absolutely nothing, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And any question you ask, you can be pretty sure someone else will be thinking of that as well. So feel free just to ask any question if there's something that's not clear, or my explanation hasn't brought out what you think's there, and you've got a thought and opinion around it, then please add that in, because questions really bring out the teaching. And I'm really interested in your views and opinions around this sutta. I already know my opinions, so I very much like to know yours. Okay. Welcome to this session, and what we're going to look at today is a sutta out of the Anguttara Nikaya. And for those of you who are new to these sessions, the Nikayas are collections of teachings from the Buddha. Some of them are long, some of them are literally middle length, the Majjhima Nikaya, middle length sessions, and then some are sort of extracts. And the Anguttara Nikaya are a series of extracts that are collected together numerically, in as much as the extract talks about 5 things, so that would be in the Book of the Fives. In this case, the extract actually looks at 10 things, so it's in the Book of the Tens. So they're not necessarily thematically grouped together, other than the number of teaching points that are brought forward. And this one is in the Book of the Tens. It's in the first chapter and the second chapter of the Book of the Tens, and it's entitled "What Purpose?" And it takes place in a place called Savatthi, which is in the Gangetic Plain in northern India, in Jetta's Grove, which was a grove of trees in Anathapindika's park. And Anathapindika was one of the principal supporters of the Buddha. He was a very wealthy person, and he actually donated this park for the Buddha and his monks to reside in during the rains retreat, and probably at other times as well. So, thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jetta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Then the Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Bhante, what is the purpose and benefit of wholesome virtuous behaviour?" So here we have Ananda, who is the attendant of the Buddha, who looked after in that capacity, the Buddha for the last 30 years of the Buddha's life. He was the Buddha's cousin. And he's also someone who is a compiler. He wants to understand what the Buddha has been teaching. And so we have him approaching the Buddha here. And the chances are that he overheard that the Buddha had been talking to some monks about the purpose of teaching. And he wanted to understand what the Buddha had taught. So he would probably have gone to the Buddha and said, "Tell me what you've actually explained to the others so that I can remember it. and then I can compile this teaching, and so that it's for the benefit of others. So, Bhante, what is the purpose and benefit of wholesome virtuous behaviour? And wholesome virtuous behaviour here is Sila. And Sila is more familiarly known as the precepts, or explained as the precepts. And for lay people, the precepts are quite simple in as much as they're guidelines for behavior which protect us, and they protect us from the hindrances. And Sister Khema will often describe the precepts as an umbrella to keep you dry from the hindrances. And so the precepts are very simple in their explanation: not to harm living or kill living beings, not to take what is not given, not to exploit or abuse sexual relationships, not to indulge in false speech, gossip, slander, and finally, not to imbibe in substances such as drink or drugs, which cloud the mind or make the mind unsuitable for development and cultivation. And these are protections, and they're not if you like, laws in that sense. They're not things that are absolutely what must be kept. They are much more suggestions, in the sense that the Buddha asks us to be responsible. And be responsible for what? Well, be responsible for when we don't keep it, what the consequences are. And then to see that if we don't want the consequences, keeping these would be a better thing to do. And so he says, when we find that we don't keep it and recognize the consequences, then we should come back and retake the precepts with a sincerity around keeping them in the future. So it's not about prohibition, it's about awareness and understanding the consequences of keeping these. So what is the purpose and benefit of wholesome virtuous behavior? Ananda, the purpose and benefit of wholesome virtuous behavior is non-regret. And non-regret's an interesting thing, because we can think of this as the absence of regret or the absence of remorse. And remorse is one of the things that comes through as these hindrances. It's the restlessness and remorse is one of the hindrances. So we can see a direct link here being explained straight away, that if we choose not to have this wholesome behavior in some aspect, then the restlessness of mind and the remorse are likely to be things that come through. And that's going to be challenging to any practice and any development. And what, Bhante, is the purpose of non-regret, this absence of remorse? The purpose and benefit of non-regret is, and the Pali word here is Pamojja. Now, Pamojja is an interesting word, because it can be translated in different ways. And sometimes it's translated as joy. And although that's quite useful, I prefer something more along the lines of relief or a lightness of mind. And we can see that around the restlessness and remorse. Restlessness and remorse doesn't have that sense of lightness or sense of relief about it. But the absence of them absolutely does. And what purpose, Bhante, is the purpose and benefit of Pamojja? The purpose and benefit of Pamojja is Piti. Now, Piti. if we look in the Visuddhimagga, one of the commentaries, if you like, collected commentaries around the teaching, Piti is described as one of 5 things. And Piti can be this sense of joyfulness, if you like, and it's described as like the hairs on our body standing up. Or it could be like the flashes of lightning, if you like, in the body. Or it can feel like the waves of joy over the body, a bit like standing in the sea, in the waves coming over the body. And these 3 types of piti are aspects of joy which we experience in daily life without any practice. And then there are 2 types of joy which come from this mental development and practice. And those are described as, one is a sort of all-pervading joy, and one is described as an uplifting joy. And these 2 types of joy or happiness are products of mental development. And so they come from within rather than from outside. And so here, the benefit of Pamojja, of this lightness of mind, is this uplifting joy that comes. And what is the purpose and benefit of this uplifting joy, this piti? Purpose and benefit of piti is tranquility. It brings a quality of mind which is tranquil. And so the best way of thinking of tranquility perhaps is like the surface of a lake. And as evening falls, the wind dies down, the ripples fade out, and the surface of the lake becomes calm and mirror-like. And tranquility sometimes is alluded to something like this. It's a quality of mind which has a stillness about it. And what is the purpose and benefit of tranquility? Well, the purpose and benefit of tranquility is sukha. Sukha. Sukha is a very interesting term because it's sometimes described as pleasure or joy or easefulness. So how is it different to the joys that we've just been describing and that sort of sense of lightness of mind? Well, what's interesting is that sukha is a very different state in the sense that when we look at Pamojja or we look at piti, the aspect of these is within the formations khandhas. So the khandhas are, the 5 khandhas are what make us up, if you like, in terms of us as an individual. So they're rupa, the body, and nama, the mind. And nama is broken up into feeling, perception, the sankharas, the mental formations, and consciousness. And piti and pamojja, they are part of the mental formations. Whereas sukha is part of the feeling formation. It's part of Vedana. It's a different aggregate. It's a felt experience, if you like. It's not a mental formation. And so it has a different character to it. And typically it comes through in the third of the stages of understanding in the practice or the jhanas. So the third jhana has this sukha and mindfulness and equanimity as part of it. And the Buddha extolled this at this stage as being, really a very wholesome state indeed to be in. Yes, sukha could be described as a contentment, an ease and contentment, because it's an ease and contentment that comes from within and is not dependent on external factors. This is this is why it's a wholesome state, and it comes from the development of these stages of understanding. And one of the things about the jhanas is that the jhanas can only be present when hindrances are absent. And so this is another aspect of the wholesome state. The one tricky thing about jhanas is that because they can be very positive states, if we're not careful, we can develop an attachment to these wholesome states. And of course, the practice is about not developing attachment to anything that comes up, but just allowing it to be itself. So the purpose and benefit of tranquility is this sukha, this state of the feeling aggregate. And what, Bhante, is the purpose and benefit of sukha? Well, the purpose and benefit of sukha is samadhi. And samadhi is a very interesting thing, because samadhi as a term does not appear to predate the teaching of the Buddha. It's not in the earlier Indian texts. It is very much in the text afterwards, and it comes to mean many different things in different teachings. So the Buddha introduced this word to describe a particular state, and it must have been a state which wasn't present in the teachings that he did before his enlightenment. So the classic development of jhanas that was predated the Buddha and that he learned from his early teachers cannot have produced or cannot have used the state that he then came to describe as samadhi. So it's an interesting thing to reflect on, is what was the nature of samadhi that was different to the techniques and cultivation that he went through in his early life. Bhante Ramsey brings out this difference in his description of samadhi as a collectedness of mind, rather than a one-pointed focus or concentration of mind that develops absorption. And the way I like to think of this is a form of concentration which allows our peripheral vision to remain present, so that we're aware of what it is that we're contemplating, but there isn't an exclusivity to this. There's this wider awareness. And this comes through in the Sutta 111, the Majjhima Nikaya 111, which is also called one by one as it occurs. And it's this description of Sariputta's progress through the jhanas and how he still remains aware of contact and other aspects of the mind in the jhana. So the jhanas then are states of awareness, not states of absorption. And this seems to be the defining difference between the Buddha's teaching at this time and what was prevalent in society or in spiritual society at that time. So the purpose and benefit of sukha is samadhi. And what, Bhante, is the purpose and benefit of samadhi? Well, the purpose and benefit of samadhi is the knowledge and vision of things as they really are. Now, this is a very interesting state. The knowledge and vision of things as they really are. What is it that we're experiencing? What is it that we're seeing? What's really important here is to, first of all, to see that there are two components. the knowledge and the vision. And so the knowledge is our understanding of the experience as we go through it, and the vision is the direct touching of that experience through our practice and observation. And the knowledge and vision that we're looking for here, and again, if we look into the Visuddhimagga, the first thing that it describes here is that the important things that need to be coming through here are the three marks, anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Anicca is the recognition of impermanence, the impermanence in all of the sensory experience. And in Buddhism, the senses are not limited to the 5 classical senses. That's the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and just assuming ear, nose, tongue. Now, thank you. Okay, so these are the 5 classical senses, and then the 6th in Buddhism is the mind. Okay, and these are called the doorways of the senses, and we need to recognize that whatever we experience through these has 3 components to them. First of all, that they're anicca, they're impermanent. And that means that given the right circumstances, they arise and they persist whilst that context or circumstances are present. And when they change, they disappear. So there's no permanence about them. And the dukkha. Now, dukkha is a tricky word because in the English language, it's almost universally described as suffering. And I think that creates a negative connotation to dukkha. Dukkha needs to be seen as an aspect of obstruction, if you like, and it manifests. It can manifest with anything in life, but it manifests when we attach or are averse to particular experience through the senses. But no one thing, no thing in itself has dukkha as its property. It's our relationship to these things, these experiences, which create the dukkha. And so part of the thing that we need to be seeing with the knowledge and vision is understanding that we're responsible for our relationship to things. And that if we can take that responsibility, then dukkha ceases. And it ceases if we address this attachment or aversion. And so the dukkha is a property that we create in whatever it is that we're dealing with because of our relationship to it. Not that everything is dukkha. If you like, everything is neutral in that sense. And then the last aspect is anatta. And anatta is basically this sense of non-self. And the non-self aspect is that if we attach or averse to something, we take it within us. And when we take it within us, we kind of make it about me, mine, or my own. We own it in a way which is not a property of what it is, but a property of that we make of it. And the non-self is understanding that whatever it is that we're experiencing is not me, mine, or my own. And when we notice that, the dukkha disappears. And so understanding these aspects of experience is one of the aspects of knowledge and vision. Another aspect is understanding the causality. Understanding that when certain circumstances arise, something comes to be. When those circumstances change, this changes. And one of the things that we have to understand from causality is that this is a flow. And that when we fail to see this, then through craving associated to the feeling, when craving arises, then we start to create all of the issues around dukkha and a sense of atta rather than anatta. And then one of the other things of knowledge and vision is finally understanding, as a part of what we've just been describing, the aspects around dukkha and how dukkha creates, or how suffering dukkha is created by our relationship to it. So these are the three things, if you like, understanding the Four Noble Truths, understanding the three marks, and understanding dependent origination, that are part of the knowledge and vision that we need to see. And what's interesting is that if we actually do that, then according to the Visuddhimagga, we have already become what it describes as a lesser Sotapan. So a Sotapan is someone who's a stream enterer, someone who has understood the teaching to the point where they've now got a direction of travel in their practice, which is aligned with the Buddha's teaching. And it's quite interesting that even at the knowledge and vision stage, it describes the huge benefit of this experience. And what Bhante is the purpose and benefit of knowledge and vision of things as they really are? Well, the purpose and benefit of this is disenchantment and dispassion. Now, these are two very interesting words in the Pali, because they're often translated in different ways. And one of the ways disenchantment can be translated is as revulsion. Now, in my own experience and in the way I choose to share the Dharma, I find this translation, which is very common, as really quite troublesome in conveying an understanding, because the revulsion has a sense of pushing away and rejection. Now, whereas if we look at it as disenchantment, rather than this active pushing away, it's much more about a leaving alone. So rather than an engaging, the revulsion is like an engaging with this and a pushing away. The leaving alone is a dropping away. And if we look at the progression through the jhanas as described in the Samyutta Nikaya, there's a lovely passage where the progress through these stages of understanding is described as a progression of cessation. Something is left away, it drops away, and then the next one drops away. So what we're doing is not, as we're progressing through these stages of understanding, we're not accreting things, but we're actually, as it were, unpacking things. Yes. And disenchantment is, if you like, for me, is a much more in sympathy view of this relationship to experience. And if we look at the description of what disenchantment actually means in the English language, I think it's quite helpful. So one of the things I did was have a look at enchanted rather than disenchanted. And enchanted means to be beguiled, to be caught up, to be captivated, to be fascinated. but also to be jinxed or cursed. So there's this sort of magical element to it, to be enchanted. And so the disenchantment is to release from that beguilement, to release from the stickiness of getting caught up in things. So that, if you think about it, what's promoting this disenchantment is seeing things as they really are. Well, when we begin to see things as they really are, some of the beguilement begins to fade, because the beguilement comes from us in our relationship to it, not from the thing itself. Now, that could be objects, it could be relationships, it could be anything that we actually experience through the senses. It's not a rejecting of that experience, but it's a seeing of it as it really is. Whereas I feel the translation revulsion is like a rejection of what we have, what we're experiencing. Remember, the objects themselves, or the subjects of this sensory experience, they are neutral. There is nothing there to be rejected. It's simply itself. What we need to do is work with our relationship to it. So disenchantment, if we look up in the dictionary, is no longer believing in the value of something. Especially because, or having learned of the problem with it. Well, what is it that we're no longer believing in the value of? It's not the object itself, because objects can be very useful and very supportive. What we're no longer believing in is the beguilement. And we see the problem with the beguilement, this being caught up. That's what we're no longer believing in. We're no longer giving a property to whatever this experience is that isn't actually part of it. It's something that we've laid on it. And with the dispassion comes, with the disenchantment comes dispassion. And what is dispassion? Oh, again, if we go into the dictionary, dispassion is to think clearly or make good decisions because we're not being influenced by emotions. And that influence I like to think of is like a veil in front of our vision. We don't see clearly because the emotion distorts what we're seeing. And so dispassion isn't, if you like, an emotionless state. Dispassion is just taking the emotion out of this engagement so that we can see the engagement for what it is and how it is. So dispassion and disenchantment are, if you like, developments of seeing things clearly as they are. And so what are the benefits, purpose and benefits of disenchantment and dispassion? Well, the purpose and benefit of this disenchantment and dispassion is the knowledge and vision of liberation. So, what is this? We've gone through this disenchantment and dispassion. This is about removing this stickiness with our sensory experience. It's about removing the clinging and the craving. And so in that process, as the clinging and craving begin to abate, then we see knowledge and vision of liberation. We see this freedom of mind, this freedom of the way we interact with our senses. And this is the understanding that the Buddha praised. And he would say, that you come to know the mind is liberated. It's a different state. And it's if you like, the ultimate wholesome state. But this whole process has been a process of developing more and more wholesome behaviour. And if we look at the teaching of Bhante Vimramsi, what is the process of moving from the unwholesome to the wholesome? Well, it's the 6 R's. The 6 R's is the first step is to recognize that the mind has moved into an unwholesome state. And what is that unwholesome state? It's when we have taken the experience personally. It's when we've made it me, mine, or my own. So as soon as we recognize that's happened, that is the knowledge and vision of things as they really are. We see what's happened there. We understand what's happened. We recognize it. And then we choose to release away from it. So we turn our mind away from that attachment or aversion. And that's a choice. That's an intention we set in our mind, Chaitanya, the most important of these mental formations. And with Chaitanya, we redirect our attention to the consequences of that attachment, which is to see craving. And craving is expressed as this tension and tightness around our brain. So we relax as best we can, that tension and tightness. Momentarily releasing craving. And then we smile. We substitute a wholesome aspect for the unwholesome. And then we come back to the object of attention. And that might be something we're doing in daily life. It might be our meditation object in the form of sitting. But this whole process is a process of moving from the unwholesome to the wholesome. And what this sort of describes is a whole process of moving from the unwholesome to the wholesome and developing the wholesome. The first step of moving from the unwholesome to the wholesome is Sila, these protections. That's something practical we can do before there's any sense of working with the mental development. And then the mental development comes through. So we have this knowledge and vision of liberation. Thus, Ananda, the purpose and benefit of wholesome virtuous behavior is non-regret. The purpose and benefit of non-regret is, it's translated joy here, but it's Pamojja, this possible relief, lightness of mind. The purpose and benefit of Pamojja is Piti. And Piti is, if you like, this uplifting happiness. So we could think of this as a lightness, also a lightness in the body. So we've got lightness in the mind, lightness in the body. And then from Piti comes tranquility, this calmness. The purpose and benefit of tranquility is sukha. So this internal contentment and ease. And the purpose and benefit of sukha is this connectedness of mind. And the purpose and benefit of the collectedness of mind is knowledge and vision of things as they really are. Seeing impermanence, seeing how dukkha is created by our relationship, seeing the nature of non-self, that when we don't take things into ourselves personally, seeing the Four Noble Truths and seeing causality, this dependent origination. And the purpose and benefit of knowledge and vision is to see the nature of our relationship to things, and that brings dispassion and disenchantment. And with dispassion and disenchantment becomes the knowledge and vision of liberation. Thus, Ananda, wholesome, virtuous behaviour progressively leads to the foremost, the ultimate experience. And that's the end of the first of the suttas. It's just over a page, but it completely encapsulates, if you like, the whole of the path from a slightly different perspective. And then I briefly wanted to mention the second sutta in this chapter, simply because it makes a very, very helpful point. So, the second one is entitled Volition, Thinking with Intention. And here the Buddha is talking to a collection of monks, bhikkhus, for a virtuous person, one who's maintaining Sila, one whose behavior is virtue. No volition, no intention need be exerted towards let non-regret arise in me. Why is that? Because it is natural. Now, the Pali for the word natural is dharmatasa. And what that describes is basically that there's an order of causation. There's a natural order to what is going to follow. So we don't have to make the intention not to have non-regret. Simply keeping the Sila means non-regret arises. So it is natural that non-regret arises in a virtuous behavior, one whose behavior is virtuous. For one without regret, no volition, no intention, no effort need be made beyond the effort of maintaining non-regret. Pamojja arises in me. It is natural that Pamojja arises, this lightness of mind, this relief, with one without regret. For one who is joyful, or with Pamojja, no volition need be exerted, let Piti arise in me. It is natural that Piti arises in one who is, or has Pamojja, this lightness of mind or relief. For one with Piti, no volition need be exerted, let my body be tranquil. It is natural for one with Piti that mind is tranquil. The body is tranquil. For one with a tranquil in body, no intention need be exerted, let me feel sukha. It is natural that one tranquil in body feels sukha. For one feeling pleasure or sukha, no effort need be exerted, let my mind be collected. It is natural that the mind of one feeling sukha is collected. And for one who is collected, no intention or effort beyond the maintenance of that need be exerted. So this is like additional effort. Let me know and see things as they really are. It is natural that one who is collected knows and sees things as they really are. So there's a natural unfolding of the teaching as we pass through with these states. For one who knows and sees things as they really are, no effort need be exerted. Let me be disenchanted and dispassionate. So, this isn't an intellectual idea and something that we need to train ourselves to see, by denial or any other sort of aspect of sort of esoteric practice. What we need is simply to maintain our practice, and these states will naturally unfold. For one who is disenchanted and dispassionate, no volition need be exerted. Let me realize the knowledge and vision of liberation. It is natural that one who is disenchanted and dispassionate realizes the knowledge and vision of liberation. Thus, bhikkhus, the knowledge and vision of liberation is the purpose and benefit of disenchantment and dispassion. Disenchantment and dispassion are the purpose and benefit of the knowledge and vision of things as they really are. The knowledge and vision of things as they really are is the purpose and benefit of concentration, or this collectiveness of mind. The collectiveness of mind is the purpose and benefit of sukha. Sukha is the purpose and benefit of tranquility. Tranquility is the purpose and benefit of piti. Piti is the purpose and benefit of Pamojja. Pamojja is the purpose and benefit of non-regret. And non-regret is the purpose and benefit of virtuous behaviour. Thus, bhikkhus, one stage flows into the next stage. One stage fills up the next stage. We're going from the near shore to the far shore. So this is a little bit like Sister Khema's description of the waterfalls, the successive waterfalls, where as we move from one stage of understanding, it flows out and then flows down into the next stage, and the next stage, and the next stage, and the next stage. This is that's the end of the second one. I'm just having a quick look at the comments that have come through. And I've got a question here saying, is jhana a consequence of samadhi, or is samadhi a consequence of jhana? Now, this is a very interesting question. Because samadhi, if we look in the yoga tradition, samadhi appears after dhyana, which is the development of jhanas. But this is not what the Buddha described. Samadhi is not a state of understanding or a waymark, if you like, on the path. It's a tool that we use. It's a cultivation of the way we work with the mind, this collectiveness. Just like, if you like, mindfulness is a tool. Mindfulness itself does not give us the experience. It's how we apply the mindfulness and our observation that gives the experience. So Bhante Viramsci would describe meditation as, from the perspective of this practice, as the ability and cultivation, if you like, of the capacity to see movements of mind and to understand them. And mindfulness being the observation tool that's used to do that. And samadhi is for me, in my understanding, is samadhi is another aspect that supports that process. It's not an end state. So in that sense, it's a supporting factor that allows the jhanas to come through, because it's part of the building block of practice. But this is, of course, for the aware jhanas, not the absorption jhanas. If we think of them, the absorption jhanas, which are a completely different teaching, then the concentration, the samadhi, the states of samadhi are things that come from that experience of jhana. But this is a different teaching. It's a teaching that developed after the time of the Buddha, and co-opted the name samadhi to mean something different. But from my understanding, the collectiveness of mind is it's a characteristic of mind that is used to develop the practice. I have another question here. The suffering of belief in, bring that back up. The suffering of believing that things, friends, family, etc. are permanent, that they are not going to change. So are anicca, anatta, dukkha interrelated, connected? Absolutely. The three marks are very much interdependent and interwoven. If we think of a self, for instance, atta, then atta would need to, our true self, in the sense of Indian philosophy at the time of the Buddha, would require the self to be utterly unchanging, permanent. Because it's our true self, it couldn't possibly cause us any suffering, because why would our true self cause us suffering? It would transcend all experience and move from life to life if we think of it in those terms. It would have these types of characteristics, and yet everything that we attribute a self to through our sense doors has a completely different characteristic. It has the potential to cause suffering if we're attached to it, and it's impermanent. So these things can't be our true self. And what's very interesting is the Buddha, when pushed about the existence of the self, would not be drawn on that subject. What he would do is he would simply say, look at your experience. What's important to understand is that anything in your sensory experience cannot be the self. And because we don't understand this, this is what generates and develops the sense of dukkha, the suffering that we feel. He wouldn't be drawn on denying a self or affirming the presence of a self. He would come back to the process of experience. Otherwise, he would get caught in eternalism or nihilism debates, and as far as he was concerned, they weren't relevant to the development that we can cultivate through our practice. Any other questions?
Hugh, if I may ask, I'm just curious about your understanding of the or your experience of the interconnectedness between mind and body. So that's my first question, actually. And the second question is in terms of the five khandhas, so to speak, is it correct to say that the mind is the body is the first khandha and the mind consists of the remaining four khandhas?
Well, let me pick up that second one first. The division is nama rupa. And so nama rupa gives birth, if you look at the links to dependent origination, to the six senses, six sense bases. And nama rupa, nama is mind and rupa is body. And then the five khandhas are broken up into body, and then these four aspects of mind. And they are feeling, perception, sankharas, mental formations, and consciousness. And if we think of feeling as pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant or unpleasant response to the six senses, the contact from the six senses. And if we think of perception as memory and the naming of things based on experience, then the sankharas, the mental formations, represent everything else that's going on that isn't feeling or perception. So it's a bucket that contains everything. And what would be contained within there is everything from the hindrances to loving kindness and compassion and equanimity and intention. And I mean, if you go through the suttas, there's a huge long list of things that are considered to be contained within the sankharas. And then the consciousness is the consciousness of those khandhas. Now, what's very interesting is that there are some sutta references which have something else that is outside the khandhas. And what's outside the khandhas is citta, And that's a whole area of interesting discussion, because it's the chitta which ultimately becomes liberated. But the chitta is itself not permanent either. So, so it's not, if you like, some unchanging entity which then gets liberated. No, it's a process, but it's a process that's outside the khandhas. But it is the khandhas that we identify with as me, myself, and I. And so I hope that's talked about mind and body. And then please remind me your first question, because my mind just ran away with the second one.
Yeah, based on your experience, your understanding of the interconnectedness between mind and body.
Okay. Yes, I mean, they are literally woven together. And so you can experience the mind through the body and the body through the mind. And Bhante Ramamsi talks about this, but he talks about it in a very specific example. So he describes craving as experienced as tension around your brain. Well, your physical brain is your body. It's a physical organ. And the sensation of tension around it is a proprioceptive experience within the body. And the sensitivity to the arising of tension is part of the aspect of the body, which is interoception. The importance of contact through the ground, for instance, or that, this is an exteroception of the body. So the body and the mind are intimately linked. What we need to do, though, is not get distracted by the body, not get caught up in the body. So this same aspect that we were talking about dispassion, we need to direct towards the body as well, in the sense of not getting caught up in it. But it's a vehicle, it's a useful thing to use in our practice. And it's essential because we want sensitivity to tension. And tension is a bodily experience. And so we don't need to artificially separate these out. But Bhante Ramamsi is very much aware that he doesn't want people, getting overly caught up in the body. And if we use a breath meditation, for instance, not as he would suggest using it as simply a reminder to release tension. So if you wanted a breath-based meditation, he would say, well, when you breathe in, release the tension around your brain and smile. And when you breathe out, do the same again. So he's using the breath as a reminder to release tension. But if we use the breath as the object and get absorbed in it, and I practice the Mahasi approach to meditation for more than 20 years. And that's very linked to seeing characteristics of physical aspects of breathing, for instance. Then this is then getting caught up in the process of the body in a way which is not what Bhante Ramamsi is asking us to do. So we can reference the body, but we reference it solely from the point of view of recognizing when tension arises. And we can use aspects of the body, particularly the energetic body. This is the vitality of the body, because when we sit in meditation and we begin to go through the stages of understanding, then we begin to release the body, release the tension within the body. And this is what promotes the body to disappear in our perception. But then as soon as our mind gets distracted, caught up in some unwholesome thing. And remember, unwholesome is when we make an experience me, mine, and my own. And what happens then, in my experience, is that we embody that, our body reappears again. And so we can use the reappearance of the body to show us what our mind is doing. And sometimes we can catch that earlier than seeing the mental movement. So the body can be very useful to take, not to get caught up in, but to steer us back onto track again. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, Maria.
Yes, one last question. Thank you very much for this session. My question is, when you were explaining the 5 khandhas and getting to consciousness, what came up for me in that moment was like a kind of comment or question, which is it possible to consider consciousness as this quality or let's say observation or like intuitive awareness or something like that?
Well, I think intuitive awareness is an aspect of consciousness, but it's not the whole. I think consciousness is a large thing, and certain aspects are in. So, intuitive awareness would be part of understanding the mind aspect of the senses and using that. But obviously, consciousness, eye consciousness is a faculty of the fact that there's an object, a functioning eye. Eye consciousness arises, and with that comes contact. And there wouldn't necessarily be any intuitive aspect around that. But what the mind then does with that experience might have an intuitive aspect to the consciousness of the mind. And certainly Bhante Brahmamsi encourages all of us to work with intuition to help guide us through our practice. So if we feel that the practice is obstructed in some way, to kind of ask ourselves, what is it I don't understand right now? And because we're working, as we work through these stages with, the thinking mind drops away after the first jhana. And so we're activating a different aspect of our mental capacity. And that kind of suggests to me that as we're gradually moving through, we're encouraging a part of or an aspect of the mind which probably works much more with intuition than we're familiar with in daily life. Is that okay? No.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else anyone would like to add or ask? Let's see if I can. I'm just checking to see if I've answered all the questions that came through. Yes, there was a comment someone around sukha, and yes, indeed, sukha is more stable because it's internal. So it comes from our own state, but we have to recognize that our own state is also subject to impermanence. So any experience of jhana, there isn't this was basically the Buddha's insight, was that when he was with his early teachers, he got through these stages of jhana, which may probably have been absorption jhanas. And whilst he was in them, they were wonderful, but he recognized that he came out of them. And there wasn't some aspect of permanence around that experience. So what he was looking for is a liberation of mind, so an experience of the mind, which created a permanent change in what he understood or some aspect. Not that he stayed in that state permanently, but that the understanding became a permanent change. And that's why I think he was progressively dissatisfied with the various teachers he had, because he felt there was still more to be done. So this is the thing about the states of jhana, is that they are still subject to impermanence, and that we should see them as stepping stones to continue to move in the direction we are heading in, and not to pick them up and carry them. And that's the simile of the raft, of building a raft, and to get across the river, we don't then put the raft on our back and continue to carry it. It's served its purpose. Okay. Anything else?
I guess if there are no more questions, then we can end the session.
Okay, so a bit of a gallop through the presentation, but hopefully something useful has come from that.
Yes, thank you so much, Hugh, for sharing with us today. Hugh, would you like to lead us in the sharing of merits, or what would you prefer? Or
Yes, I'm not sure I've got a copy of that in front of me. My memory.
I would have so I have the yeah, I have it here, but it's a hard copy.
Okay, I think I might have a hard copy. One moment, if you'd like to just. Okay. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, May.
Oh, thank you so much, Hugh. Bye-bye.
Pleasure. Good.